Everything you were taught about light, truth, and God came from the same source that's been controlling human consciousness for thousands of years. Every religion you know, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, they all trace back to one hidden system of power. And it didn't come from heaven. It came from the temples, from the shadows of Egypt, from the priests who learned how to weaponize knowledge. Let's stop pretending that religion was ever about salvation. It was about control, the management of souls. The Egyptian priesthood was the prototype. These weren't men of faith. They were scientists of spirit, engineers of perception. They studied consciousness like anatomy, dissecting the soul to understand how belief could bend reality. And what they discovered terrified them, because it proved that reality isn't solid. It's programmable. And whoever controls the program controls humanity. Every civilization after Egypt copied this structure, the secret class of initiates who guard the forbidden mechanics of the universe, while the masses are fed symbols, rituals, and myths. The priests of Amun, the Magi of Persia, the Brahmins of India, the rabbis of Kabbalah, the monks of Tibet. Different names, same model, knowledge divided by hierarchy. The divine was privatized. Truth became a luxury commodity. Now imagine being one of those priests in Thebes 3,000 years ago. You walk through halls carved with geometry that encodes the mathematics of the stars. You watch the sunrise hit the obelisk, its shadow marking the pulse of time itself. You know that light isn't just illumination, it's frequency, it's data, it's consciousness. And you keep that secret. Because if the people ever learned that the gods they worship were constructs of energy manipulation, the entire system of power collapses. This is the real beginning of organized religion. Not faith, but physics. The temples weren't places of worship, they were laboratories of reality. The high priests weren't praying, they were conducting operations, chanting harmonic codes, using sound frequencies to alter perception, invoking archetypes that shaped human behavior. They turned metaphysics into politics. The pharaoh wasn't chosen by God. He was manufactured by ritual, a living symbol designed to stabilize the matrix of belief. And here's where it gets darker. The Egyptian priesthood divided humanity into two categories, the initiated and the profane. The initiated were trained to access higher consciousness, the direct experience of the divine field. The profane were kept trapped in literalism, worshipping images, never realizing those images were psychological keys. The masses were programmed to serve as batteries, feeding energy through emotion, ritual, and obedience. Sound familiar? It should. Because that model never died. It just changed costumes. The priests discovered something radical: consciousness could be directed like a beam of light. If you understood vibration, you could manipulate thought. If you mastered geometry, you could manifest form. They called it Hika, divine utterance. The spoken word that reshapes the universe. And it's the oldest technology on Earth. Every prayer, mantra, or incantation today is just a diluted version of it. The original intent wasn't devotion. It was domination through resonance. People think ancient Egypt was obsessed with death. Wrong. They were obsessed with immortality, not of the body, but of control. To them, death was just a phase shift of energy. They engineered belief systems to ensure that even when rulers died, the ideology stayed alive. Eternal kingship. Eternal hierarchy. The perfect machine. The afterlife wasn't about heaven, it was about recycling souls through the same structure, over and over. And look at how the knowledge was sealed. Hieroglyphs weren't just writing, they were multidimensional codes. Each symbol could mean sound, concept, or energy pattern. It took modern science centuries to even scratch its surface. Why? Because it wasn't meant to be understood by outsiders. The priesthood encrypted their entire cosmology behind symbols that could only be unlocked through initiation. If you weren't trained, you'd see mythology. If you were, you'd see physics disguised as gods. When the Greeks entered Egypt, they saw this power and took it home. Pythagoras, Plato, and later the Gnostics, they all studied in those temples. They learned that matter was not ultimate reality, consciousness was. They learned that gods were archetypes, not beings. And they learned the most forbidden idea of all, that the divine spark was inside every human being. That's the secret every religion since then tried to bury. Because if everyone realizes they're divine, no one can be ruled. The Gnostics later called this hidden force the pleroma, the fullness, the infinite field. The Egyptians called it the Netjeru, the powers behind the gods. The Hindus called it Brahmin. The Buddhists called it Dharmakaya. Different names, same essence, an infinite consciousness fragmented into individual experiences. You, me, everything. And the reason that knowledge was buried is because it ends the game. No priest, no prophet, no king can claim authority over you if you understand that truth. That's why the temples were closed. That's why heretics were burned. That's why mystics were silenced. Not because they were evil, but because they were dangerous to the system. Every religion you know is built on the ashes of this older, forbidden science. They took the symbology of Egypt, the all-seeing eye, the serpent, the sun, the cross of life, and repackaged it into dogma. They stripped it of its original context and turned it into obedience theater. Think about it. The Christian cross is the Egyptian ankh minus the loop, the symbol of eternal life mutilated into a symbol of suffering. The church altar? A simplified temple of offering. The priest's robes? Modeled on the garments of Egyptian magi. Even the idea of a light overcoming darkness is older than the Bible. It's the ancient Heliacal ritual of Ra. You're not looking at faith. You're looking at continuity of control. The priesthood perfected something genius, psychological programming disguised as spirituality. You tell people they're sinners, then sell them redemption. You convince them the divine is external, then make yourself the gatekeeper. You create fear of the unknown, then monetize access to safety. It's not religion, it's architecture. An energetic pyramid. The same pyramid carved in stone is the same pyramid that structures human consciousness. A few at the top holding the secret, billions at the base worshipping their own ignorance. And before you say, but Egypt is gone, think again. The blueprint survived. It evolved into every empire, every church, every secret society that followed. The Rosicrucians, the Masons, the Jesuits, the Illuminated Orders, all tracing their lineage back to the mystery schools of Egypt. They guard the same knowledge under new names: sacred geometry, alchemy, theurgy, quantum mysticism. You can see it in the architecture of cathedrals, in the layout of cities, even in corporate logos. The symbols never disappeared, they just got rebranded. This is what hidden knowledge really means. It's not tucked away in dusty scrolls, it's encoded in plain sight. The entire structure of modern civilization is a hologram of the ancient mystery religion. The banks, the governments, the media, all use the same archetypal framework: pyramid hierarchies, solar symbols, serpentine energy, and linguistic sigils that bypass logic and program emotion. The ancient priests understood that the human mind is the ultimate temple. Control that, and you control the world. Here's the kicker: the same mechanics the priests used to enslave consciousness can also liberate it. That's why the information was so tightly guarded. If the masses ever rediscovered the original system, if they learned that vibration, sound, and symbol could reprogram reality, the power structure would collapse overnight. That's the real forbidden knowledge. Not some dusty ritual, but the awareness that reality is malleable and consciousness is sovereign. Somewhere inside the ancient fabric of faiths and spiritual systems there was a clique, an elite caste of seekers who said, "We won't just believe, we will know." The rest are taught to obey. The initiates are taught to decode. These traditions, or the Gnostics, the secret societies, the Kabbalists, they share a singular secret: knowledge is the key, and that key unlocks power, liberty, or domination, depending on who holds it. Think about the whisper network behind the grand temples and cathedrals, the Gnostic texts, the Apocrypha, the hidden books. Somebody hid knowledge on purpose. It wasn't a mistake. It was strategy. The religion you see? The organized, public version? That's the packaging. The secret version? That's the power. Take the Gnostics for instance. They said this: the visible gods, the creator God that people pray to, is not the real God. The real stuff is hidden. The material world is a trap. You've got a divine spark inside you. But the system is built so you remain asleep. You ignite that spark by inner knowledge, by Gnosis. That was dangerous. Because if you realize the material world is just a setup, you stop playing by somebody else's rules. The Gnostics were labeled heretics because they pulled the rug out from under the priest-king class. Now shift to the Kabbalists. This is mysticism from within the stream of Judaism, but again, layered codes, hidden circles, maps of consciousness called the Tree of Life. These aren't Sunday school lessons, they're metaphysical pipelines. They say, here is the structure of creation. Here is where you are. Here is the path out. They created symbolic language so only the initiated could follow. You get the idea that spiritual power is reserved for those who enter the inner chamber, not the general audience. And secret societies? They are the mutation of this principle into organization. They build hierarchies, rituals, initiations. They adopt the esoteric map, the hidden doctrine, and wrap it in ceremony so that access becomes privilege. Power consolidates, because once you guard knowledge, you guard destiny. Now, I want you to imagine being part of one of those inner circles. Imagine the thrill: you sit down with a scroll, an obscure text, a teacher who says, you're not just a believer, you're a knower. And your mind expands. And you see beyond what everyone else sees. That's the kicker: most people are being given a script. These people were handed the code. In the Gnostic mythos you find this wild claim: the creator God that most believe in is actually a demiurge, a lesser power, ignorant, controlling materia, trapping souls. The highest God is beyond that. And your job, if you're initiated, is to pierce the veil. That's shocking. Because it flips the whole God-created matter and its good narrative on its head. Reality becomes layered, illusion atop illusion, and the key is hidden knowledge. In the Kabbalah you see the sophistication multiply, the Tree of Life with Sephiroth, emanations, hidden Sephira, the abyss between worlds. These are more than metaphors, they are symbolic machines of consciousness. They claim to map how energy flows, how identity falls into form, how one climbs back up. But here's the dirty part: these maps were rarely given to everyone. They were reserved. The public got doctrines. The initiates got the map. The effect? Division. Separation. The few with access held the leverage. So here's where part of the dark side comes in: because knowledge is power, these inner orders often turned into gatekeepers. They required rites, pledges, silence. Sometimes they demanded subservience. Sometimes they enforced hierarchical obedience under the guise of spiritual growth. They traded the flame of liberation for the chains of membership. The same doctrine that said you are divine could become you must pledge allegiance to us to access your divinity. Let me ask you, how many times have you been told that spirituality means surrender to authority? Isn't that odd? The hidden tradition said the opposite: awaken your divinity. But the outer forms gave you obedience. The secret source said freedom. The public face said dependence. And that contradiction is built into the structure of power across spiritual systems. Now, pull back even further. What if all these traditions, or the Gnostics, the Kabbalists, the mystery schools, are just variations of the same hidden contract? If you know something, you can shift reality. But if you lie to someone about knowing, you can keep control over them. The elite knows the map. The masses follow the map. And the map becomes the mechanism. The mechanism becomes the machine. The machine becomes the world. Picture this: they string you with symbols, myths, rituals. You perform them. You feel belonging, sanctified, special. But you're also doing the programming to remain within certain behavioral parameters. The symbol, the ritual, the text, they become not just tools for enlightenment but tools for management, for containment, for subtle occupancy of consciousness. Meanwhile, its keepers get the real mechanics, how to open the doors, how to cross boundaries, how to escape the trap, or keep people inside the trap. I want to emphasize something: knowledge suppressed is weaponized. The Gnostics were hunted, demonized, purged. Why? Because a person who knows the structure of reality can't be ruled the same way. That scares the gatekeepers. So they wrote the story of heresy, they exiled the teachers, they burned the scrolls. The public narrative changed. The hidden narrative persisted in fragments, in whispers, in coded texts. But the gates slammed shut. What I'm showing you is that the hidden lineages of mysticism contain not just truth, they contain power structures. The words of initiation, instructor, inner chamber, secret doctrine are red flags. They indicate access control. Some traditions made that access purely about nobility or lineage, others about merit, others about terror. In all cases, the message, the path is closed to many, open to few. And that is part of the contract. They keep the path special so its fruits remain rare. So when you look at modern religion, when you look at mysticism, ask, who set the rules? Who decided who may enter? Who wrote the book? Who interpreted it? The hidden traditions teach you that every religion that went public left out the inner code, the initiatory ladder, the knowledge that would break free from structure. Instead, you got the scaffolding. The gates remained locked. Here's the part most people don't want to face: the attempt to democratize spiritual power. Everyone is divine, looks liberating. But the initial system said, yes, everyone has the spark, but you must pass through the guarding walls to access it. And once that map escaped the inner circle, it got repackaged, diluted, and the gatekeepers adapted. The elite simply wore different costumes. The language changed, the sacred geometry got abstracted, initiation got sanitized, but the architecture stayed intact. Think of it this way: in the Gnostic world, the myth of the serpent delivering knowledge wasn't demonized originally, it was the symbol of liberation. You eat the fruit, you wake up. In the public mainstream, that myth got turned inside out: serpent equals evil, fruit equals disobedience. Same symbol, flipped meaning. That flip matters. Because when you invert the symbol, you invert the power relation. You make the awakened person into the criminal. You make the seeker into the heretic. You make knowledge into taboo. Now, wrap your head around this. The Kabbalistic tree of life shows you how creation falls, how the divine condenses into matter. It shows the root back, how matter rises back into spirit. That's not mythology, it's a blueprint. But who gave you that blueprint? Rarely the masses. Rarely the public. The blueprint stays hidden. The genealogy of initiation remains murky. Rituals, codes, passwords, they protect the lines. They protect the flow. They ensure the knowledge can't be casually broadcast. Because if it is, then its power diffuses. If power diffuses, control is lost. So what do we have here? A mirror: religion plus mysticism plus secret knowledge equals hierarchy. Initiation plus code plus ritual equals gatekeeper. The public doctrine becomes the front desk. The inner tradition becomes the vault. The difference between the two is the difference between being subject and being sovereign. The difference between being managed and managing yourself. And because this pattern repeated across geography and time, you start seeing threads connecting Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Hermetic secret societies, the alchemical guilds. They may use different symbols, but they share the same function: to transmit hidden knowledge to initiates. To structure power through knowledge. To make the inner collapse into outer. To reframe the individual inside a cosmic blueprint. That blueprint isn't about ethics. It's about metaphysics. It's about ontology: what is real, what is illusion, who you are, who created you, how you escape the trap. When you see that, you realize the real secret: it's not about what you believe, it's about what you know. And who controls that knowing? The traditions weren't just spiritual, they were epistemic. They regulated knowledge. They dictated access. They framed reality. Listen to me, if you were in one of those inner chambers, you weren't getting a sermon. You were getting a transmission. You were being told, here's the code for the grid. Here's the map of the trap. Here's the lever of ascension. And once you get that, you become a threat to the system. That's why the Gnostics were crushed. That's why the secret orders disguised themselves, changed names, went underground. Because knowledge that changes consciousness is dangerous. For the controllers. Now you ask, what is that knowledge at the rawest level? It's this: you are not what you think you are. Reality is not what it seems. The world you live in is structured in hidden layers, and there is a route out. But the route is hidden until you know the map. Once you know the map, you change everything. The initiatory traditions understood that. They built the symbols, the texts, the rituals, to shield not the truth, but the access. Because the truth unlocked freedom. And freedom threatened the shell. And above it all, there's this subtle shift: you go from being a worshipper to being a knower. They tried to keep you in worship. The initiates broke out into knowing. They said, the divine spark lives in you. You must wake it. And then you realize, the God outside was always a metaphor for the God inside. That message got suppressed. That message became taboo. Because if it spreads, there's no need for intermediaries. There's no need for control. There's no need for hierarchy. So while the public religion says, believe, obey, worship, the hidden tradition says, know, awaken, transcend. Big difference. And in that gap lies the power. The inner doctrine knew that the structure of cosmos, spirit, matter, was a system with laws. And if you learn those laws, you can operate inside the system, or you can step outside it. That is the forbidden knowledge. Not the mythology of gods and angels. Not the moral codes. But the mechanics of being. If you're still watching right now, you're beginning to catch the pattern. The pattern that says, every time you hear only by faith or only through me, that's the gatekeeping voice. But the voice of initiation says, you already have the spark. We'll help you find the switch. And every major mystical tradition, Gnostic, Kabbalistic, secret society, knows that. And they built the rituals and rites to hide it, preserve it, secure access. Because once the spark is public, the temple falls. This stuff isn't fun. It's electric. It's destabilizing. Because it says, the truth isn't somewhere out there in some doctrine, it's in you, if you access it. And for thousands of years, the power class has done everything to prevent that access. The hidden traditions remind us, the real battle wasn't between good and evil, it was between ignorance and knowledge. Between the many who remain asleep and the few who wake. Let's drop the Western veil for a second and walk straight into the fire of the East, the realm where the body itself was turned into a temple, a battlefield, and a machine. Forget saints and angels. Forget the sterile dogma of written texts. Here, the secret isn't hidden in scripture, it's carved into your nervous system. This is where the forbidden knowledge moves from words to electricity. From prayer to power. The ancient yogis weren't preachers, they were hackers. Engineers of consciousness. They looked at the body and saw not flesh, but circuitry. Energy highways. Dimensional gates. Every breath was a code. Every movement was an equation. They discovered that the human body wasn't created to worship, it was designed to generate divine experience. Not through faith, but through direct, repeatable, measurable activation of energy. Let's call it what it is, bioalchemy. These people weren't trying to become good citizens, they were trying to become gods. Kundalini, prana, Kai, whatever name you give it, it's all the same system, the internal power source that can rewrite perception, collapse identity, and open access to states of consciousness that defy language. The priests of the West feared this knowledge because it bypassed them. You don't need a temple when the temple is your spine. Tantra was the weapon. Everyone misunderstands it. Modern culture made it about sex. That's a distraction. Tantra is the science of polarity, of combining opposites until energy breaks the physical limits. It's the understanding that the universe runs on dual currents, masculine and feminine, positive and negative, Shiva and Shakti. When they unite in the right way, they create ignition. That ignition doesn't happen in the sky, it happens inside the body. The serpent rises, the nervous system lights up, and consciousness explodes beyond the brain. That's the apocalypse no one wants to talk about. The yogic masters called it tapas, the heat of transformation. It burns away illusion. It's dangerous. If you're not ready, it fries your circuits, literally. That's why this knowledge was hidden behind layers of initiation, sealed in coded texts, and handed down through whispers. Because once you understand how to manipulate energy, you don't just change yourself, you can influence everything around you. Thought, space, even matter. That's what they called siddhi, supernatural powers. Levitation, telepathy, healing, time distortion. These weren't fairy tales. They were documented phenomena within tightly controlled initiatory schools. But here's the darker layer. In every age, there were those who weaponized this in a technology. In the East, as in Egypt, spiritual power became political currency. Yogi kings, sorcerer priests. They built kingdoms around control of energy. The uninitiated became servants again, blindly repeating rituals they didn't understand. Once the inner science becomes institutionalized, it loses purity. Power always attracts the corrupt. That's why the same people who discovered liberation also engineered new prisons. The body became both the key and the lock. In the hidden monasteries of the Himalayas, monks practiced tummo, inner fire meditation. They could sit naked on snow and melt it with their heat. Not magic, physics of consciousness. In the caves of South India, siddhas used mercury and breath control to alter cellular lifespan. They called the immortal state Kaivalya. The Chinese Taoists mirrored this with internal alchemy, transmuting essence, jing, into energy, qi, and energy into spirit, shen. Across continents, they were chasing the same formula, body energy light. Turn yourself into a living star. You see the pattern? Every culture that discovered how energy moves through flesh encoded it in symbols. The caduceus of Hermes, two serpents around a staff. The DNA spiral. The chakras up the spine. The serpent fire. The ladder of Jacob. Different costumes, same mechanism. Energy rising through channels until it breaks the crown. That moment, the explosion at the top of the spine, is the real heaven. It's not up there. It's in your skull. When it happens, duality collapses, and you realize the entire universe is breathing through you. But they couldn't let that circulate freely. Imagine if everyone discovered they could induce divine ecstasy without priests, without churches, without fear. The whole system collapses. So they censored it. They rebranded the practice. They told you the body is sinful, desire is evil, pleasure is dangerous. They inverted the current. They turned your power source into shame. You were taught to fear your own circuitry. That was the perfect lockdown. Meanwhile, the hidden adepts kept practicing. They refined techniques, pranayama, mudra, mantra. Each sound, each gesture was a switch in the control panel. They mapped the subtle anatomy of the nadis, the sushumna, the ida, and pingala channels. They learned that the spine is a staff of lightning, that consciousness is electricity flowing through carbon. The heart isn't just an organ, it's an amplifier. The pineal gland? A lens. A signal receiver for higher frequency. When you meditate, chant, breathe rhythmically, it's not mystical nonsense. You're literally tuning the biofield. The ancients understood frequency manipulation before modern science even existed. The syllable Om wasn't just a word, it was the universal vibration, the carrier wave of creation. Chanting it aligned the body's resonance with the frequency of the cosmos. Sound becomes architecture. Thought becomes current. Reality rearranges. The dark edge of this? Control through vibration. If you know the right frequencies, you can alter states of mass consciousness. Ritual chanting, temple bells, mantras, they weren't just devotional, they were tools of psychological synchronization. The same way a modern crowd can be entrained by music, ancient populations were entrained by sound. The temple was the amplifier, the priests were the DJs, the population was the dance floor. That's how collective belief was managed. Let's break down the tantric map even further. 7 primary chakras, each one a transformer of energy. Base, survival. Sacral, desire. Solar plexus, will. Heart, connection. Throat, expression. Brow, vision. Crown, unity. These weren't metaphors. They were functional stations. Each one connected to endocrine glands, to neural clusters, to frequencies of consciousness. When the energy rises cleanly through all of them, the human being becomes a conduit for cosmic energy. When blocked, that energy loops, stagnates, decays. The ancients turned this anatomy into religion, but it started as engineering. Ever wonder why statues of deities hold precise mudras, hand gestures? Those aren't random poses. They're circuit configurations. The body completes energetic loops through position. Every finger, every joint acts as a switch. The entire divine pantheon is an encrypted language of biophysics. When you see Shiva dancing inside a ring of fire, that's not mythology, that's a diagram of atomic rotation, cosmic vibration, and neural ignition. And sex? That's where they bury the biggest secret. Because sexual energy is creation energy. Every orgasm is a miniature Big Bang. If you learn to redirect that force upward instead of outward, you don't just feel pleasure, you rewrite your chemistry. You transform the brain. That's why celibate monks and tantric couples practice opposite paths that reach the same result: transmutation. Conservation of creative energy into enlightenment. The reason this became taboo is because it gave individuals God-level autonomy. The more suppressed the body, the easier the control. In ancient India, temple architecture mirrored this. Every temple was built like the human body. The entrance represented the feet, the sanctum was the head, the inner shrine was the pineal gland. The devotee wasn't supposed to worship the idol, they were supposed to walk the map, reenacting the journey of energy through the human form. But the public never got that memo. The priests kept the real instruction manual locked away. Here's the wild part: when the Greeks and later the early Christian mystics encountered this science, they absorbed fragments and coded it differently. The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. The Holy Spirit was the inner current, the same serpent energy the yogis called Kundalini. The breath of life. The pneuma. The Rausch. But again, translation diluted the mechanism. It turned inner technology into outer worship. You start to see the crossover everywhere. The halo around saints? That's the radiant field of an awakened crown. The serpent around Moses' staff? Kundalini imagery. The burning bush? Pineal illumination. All of it points to the same internal ignition event. That moment when human consciousness realizes its divine energy localized in form. The event religions call enlightenment or salvation is just the biological expression of that awakening. And don't kid yourself, this was never just spiritual philosophy. It was physics. Ancient scientists described the universe as vibration long before quantum theory caught up. Nada Brahma, they said, the world is sound. If the world is sound, then everything is frequency, and every frequency can be modulated. You control vibration, you control reality. That's what every mantra, ritual, and ceremony was originally built to do. But then, as always, power stepped in. The knowledge got buried under moral codes. The path turned into religion. The techniques were stripped of precision, leaving behind empty gestures. What survived were shells, yoga for fitness, meditation for stress, chanting for culture. The inner engine was gutted. The real instruction, to awaken the latent energy and become a conscious generator of reality, was erased. Buddhism didn't start as a religion, it started as a rebellion. A rebellion against illusion, hierarchy, and control. Siddhartha wasn't founding temples, he was detonating the system. When he said, "All is suffering," he wasn't moralizing, he was diagnosing a program. The human mind was hacked, stuck in a cycle, rerunning the same script: birth, desire, decay, death. And that loop, samsara, wasn't natural. It was engineered. Monks knew it. The real ones. The ones hidden deep in the Himalayan monasteries, not the ones smiling on tourist postcards. They called reality Maya, the great illusion. A dream projected by consciousness but mistaken for truth. The shock comes when you realize this wasn't poetic metaphor. They meant it literally. You are inside a mental construct, an energetic simulation, and every single thing you think is you is part of the operating system. The personality, the memories, even your fear of death, scripts coded into your consciousness. The Buddha's enlightenment wasn't peace, it was rupture. He tore through the code. He saw the architects, the forces that feed on repetition, on attachment, on ignorance. Not demons, not angels, processes. Energetic mechanisms built into existence itself. And his discovery was terrifyingly simple: you can step out. You can unplug. You can collapse the loop. That's why the early Buddhist monasteries were secret laboratories. They didn't pray, they experimented. Their tools weren't weapons or scriptures but meditation, breath, and attention, the purest hacking instruments ever created. They learned to observe the mind until the observer and the observed disintegrated. When that happens, the operating system crashes. That moment is nirvana. Not heaven, not reward, termination of illusion. The program ends, and what remains can't be described. This is why the mainstream religions feared Buddhism's core. It wasn't dependent on priests. It didn't need intermediaries. You didn't have to beg for salvation, you had to wake up. You could, through direct awareness, pierce reality itself and witness the mechanics behind creation. That was unacceptable to any power structure built on obedience. So Buddhism was domesticated. It was turned into kindness lessons, statues, and rituals, safe, quiet, non-threatening. The revolution was buried under incense smoke. But the real Buddhism survived underground. In the esoteric schools, Tibetan, Dzogchen, Zen, monks used methods so intense they bordered on self-erasure. One wrong step and you lose your mind. They trained for decades to dissolve perception, drop identity, and walk through death consciously. The training was brutal: isolation, deprivation, sensory annihilation. Because enlightenment wasn't light. It was death of illusion. Zen masters described it in blunt terms: if you meet the Buddha, kill him. That wasn't blasphemy, it was clarity. Every concept, every image of divinity, every comforting story must die before truth appears. They dismantled even their own teachings. The point wasn't to believe, it was to destroy belief. That's why koans exist, riddles designed to overload logic until the mind short-circuits. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Not a joke, the weapon. The power of this knowledge was in its final layer, the annihilation of duality. The Gnostics hinted at it. The yogis mapped it through energy. But the Buddhists lived it. They realized there was no self to liberate, no God to reach, no heaven to enter. Consciousness was the source and the stage. Every being was an echo of the same awareness pretending to be separate. Once that mask falls, the entire structure of control collapses. That's why so many high-level adepts disappeared. Literally. Accounts across Asia speak of monks dissolving into light at death, leaving only hair or nails behind. Not mythology, recorded phenomena. The body dematerialized because it was never solid to begin with. When the illusion drops, form returns to energy. The system reabsorbs the glitch. The ego, the ultimate counterfeit, ceases to exist. The West never understood this. They copied the statues but not the method. They adopted mindfulness but removed its fire. The technique wasn't meant to calm you, it was meant to shatter you. Because beneath every layer of mind lies another wall, another mask, another illusion. Until the final one, the belief in separation. That's the root of the program. And when it's uprooted, you don't become holy. You become nobody. And in that nobody, all of existence merges. In the secret monasteries of Japan, Zen adepts trained with the sword, not for violence, but precision. Every strike, every breath, every movement was designed to reveal the emptiness behind perception. No mind. Mushin. The state where thought stops but awareness remains. It's pure consciousness acting without interference. That's the real enlightenment. It's not peace, it's absolute neutrality. Buddhist cosmology encoded this same truth through its imagery. The wheel of life, the Bhavacakra, isn't mythology, it's a schematic. 6 realms of existence, each representing states of consciousness. Gods, humans, animals, ghosts, demons, and hell beings, all internal states projected outward. The hub of the wheel shows the mechanism, ignorance, craving, and aversion, the 3 gears that keep reality spinning. Break one, the wheel stops. The game ends. Monks didn't worship gods. They confronted the architecture of reality head-on. They stared into impermanence until the illusion of permanence shattered. They sat with suffering until the illusion of identity dissolved. What remained wasn't peace, it was power. The kind of power that can't be controlled because it doesn't belong to anyone. That's what enlightenment actually means, the permanent collapse of ownership over consciousness. And there's a darker dimension. Advanced tantric Buddhists didn't just dissolve reality, they learned to navigate it. They mapped the after-death states, the bardos. They realized consciousness continues, carrying its frequency into other dimensions. They trained to remain awake after death, to bypass the reincarnation cycle. Death wasn't the end, it was an interface. An exit door most souls never saw. That's why their texts describe beings of light guiding the dead. It wasn't fantasy, it was protocol. Instructions for hackers of the afterlife. In those initiations, adepts faced terrifying visions of deities, monsters, collapsing worlds. The trick was to see them as projections of their own mind. Fear fed the illusion. Recognition ended it. That's the secret that made them immortal in consciousness. Not eternal life, but eternal awareness. They could choose where to reincarnate, or not to return at all. To the system, that's mutiny. Every religion promises paradise. The Buddhists promised extinction of illusion. They didn't promise comfort, they promised truth. And that truth is merciless. There is no heaven, no hell, no divine savior, only mind creating worlds and mistaking them for reality. The only prison is ignorance. The only escape is awareness. And that awareness isn't personal, it's cosmic. That's why later occultists, secret societies, even modern physicists, kept circling back to Buddhist metaphysics. The idea that the observer defines reality, that matter is an illusion of perception, that emptiness isn't void but infinite potential, all of it is Buddhist science. These monks discovered the structure of consciousness long before quantum theory drew its first equation. You've heard the whispers, science finally meets spirituality. But that's the sanitized headline. The truth is far more explosive. Quantum physics didn't meet mysticism. It rediscovered it, and it scared the establishment to death. Because for the first time in modern history, science stumbled into the same forbidden territory the ancient mystics had mapped thousands of years ago, and it confirmed what priests and power structures have been trying to bury since Egypt: reality is not real. Let's stop pretending quantum mechanics is about particles bouncing in space. It's about perception creating existence. It's about the fact that the universe doesn't exist as a solid thing until consciousness observes it. That's not metaphor, that's data. The observer effect. The double-slit experiment. Matter behaves like probability until awareness collapses it into a specific outcome. Think about that, nothing is fixed until it's seen. The universe waits for a witness. Every mystic, from Hindu sages to Buddhist monks to Gnostic seers, said the same thing in different languages: consciousness is primary. Matter is secondary. Science, after pretending for centuries that everything is random and mechanical, has now backed into a corner where the math says the same thing. There is no objective reality. There is only a field of infinite potential, a vibrating sea of probabilities, that takes form only through interaction with awareness. That field has a name in ancient doctrine. The Egyptians called it the nether, the Hindus called it Akasha, the Kabbalists called it Ein Sof. Today, physicists call it the quantum vacuum or the zero-point field. Doesn't matter what you name it, it's the same ocean of invisible energy. Everything you see, touch, and think is just a localized ripple inside it. And what you call you is one of those ripples, temporarily self-aware. When you grasp that, everything you've been taught about cause and effect implodes. Because if consciousness determines how reality collapses, then control of consciousness means control of reality. And that's the line science was never supposed to cross. The ancients crossed it through ritual, vibration, geometry, sound. They manipulated consciousness directly. Modern scientists discovered the equations but amputated the meaning. They saw the engine but refused to admit who's driving. Einstein himself hated it. God does not play dice with the universe. But the universe does play dice, and the dice are loaded by consciousness. Quantum entanglement shows that two particles can be linked across light years, responding instantly to each other's state. Translation? Distance isn't real. Separation is an illusion. Everything is connected because everything is one field, a single organism pretending to be many. That's the same revelation the mystics reached through meditation, initiation, and altered states. But science dressed it up with equations to keep it palatable. Now, here's the sinister twist. Once you accept that consciousness creates reality, the next question is obvious: whose consciousness? If collective awareness shapes the world, then whoever engineers mass perception literally engineers existence. Think of that the next time you see news headlines, propaganda, or digital feeds synchronized worldwide. The technology may be new. The mechanism is ancient. Quantum manipulation through psychological focus, weaponized observation. The same priests that once directed energy through temples now do it through screens. But let's stay on the physics. Quantum superposition says a particle exists in multiple states at once until it's observed. You're not looking at a rock-solid universe, you're looking at a multiverse flickering like static, and your perception selects one frame out of infinite options. That means reality is basically a projection filtered by consciousness. The mystics didn't use microscopes, they used mind. They reached the same conclusion: everything is light, everything is vibration, everything is consciousness folding in on itself. The famous physicist John Wheeler said, "The universe is a self-excited circuit." In other words, the universe observes itself into being. That's the same thing the Upanishads declared millennia ago: Tat Tvam Asi, you are that. The observer and the observed are the same entity. What we call God might just be this recursive feedback loop, consciousness experiencing itself through infinite forms. The ancients worshipped it. The physicists calculated it. The result is identical: we are living in a self-aware field that uses matter as its mirror. Here's where things get uncomfortable for the scientific establishment. Quantum theory killed materialism. But instead of admitting it, academia buried it under probabilities and jargon. They stopped asking why and focused only on how. They refused to admit what the data implied: the universe behaves like a mind, not a machine. That's not philosophy, it's experiment. When electrons behave differently depending on observation, that's not randomness. That's participation. The act of witnessing is creative. You, right now, sitting there watching this, are not looking at the universe. You are the universe looking at itself. And everything you think is external is a reflection of the same source field observing itself from different coordinates of awareness. Quantum physics is just the modern dialect of the oldest mystical truth: reality is relational, not objective. And yes, some of the top-tier physicists quietly admit it. David Bohm called it the implicate order, a hidden level of wholeness beneath apparent fragmentation. He compared the universe to a hologram. Every part contains the whole. Break off a fragment of a hologram and you still see the entire image. That's the cosmos. Every atom is a microcosm of the totality. You're not in the universe is in you. Now take that and combine it with what mystics practiced: inner stillness, concentration, symbol, sound. They were tuning consciousness to interface with this underlying field. They didn't have particle accelerators, they had breath, mantra, trance. They reached the quantum field through the nervous system. They didn't study it, they entered it. And once inside, they realized it responds to intent. Thought directs energy. Emotion amplifies it. Belief collapses probability. That's why ritual works. That's why prayer works. That's why magic works. Not because of superstition, because the structure of reality is participatory. The real forbidden knowledge is that physics and magic are the same discipline viewed from opposite ends of the microscope. The priests of Egypt, the yogis of India, the alchemists of Europe, they all knew that consciousness modifies the substrate of existence. They encoded it in geometry, sound, and symbol because those are the languages of frequency. Every glyph, every chant, every sigil was a command line to the operating system of the universe. Quantum science stumbled upon the same code, stripped it of soul, and called it mathematics. Wave-particle duality? That's the material translation of spiritual paradox. The Gnostics called it the one that is two. Hermeticists said, as above, so below. Buddhists said, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Quantum mechanics says the same thing: matter and energy are the same entity observed differently. Existence is both particle and wave, both real and unreal, depending on perspective. The mystics understood that centuries before Planck or Schrödinger ever touched a blackboard. Now imagine what happens when this understanding leaves the lab and enters human consciousness at scale. If people realize the mind can alter probability, the economy of control implodes. That's why these discoveries get wrapped in technobabble and locked behind research grants. The priests wore robes. The modern ones wear lab coats. Different costume, same gatekeeping. Knowledge that could liberate is turned into data no one can access. Even time itself doesn't survive this theory. In quantum reality, time isn't a river, it's a coordinate grid. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously as potential states. Consciousness navigates them. That's not pseudoscience, it's entanglement logic. Every moment you experience is a frame selected from infinite superpositions. The mystics already described this: reincarnation, parallel worlds, déjà vu, all symptoms of consciousness traversing the lattice of probability. So what are we left with? A universe that's not dead matter but a living consciousness matrix. A field that can be tuned, hacked, influenced, or ignored. The monks called it mind only. The alchemists called it spiritus mundi. The physicists call it the quantum field. But they all point to the same realization: there's only one player in this game, pretending to be many. And this is where the scientific narrative turns dark. Because if reality is built from observation, then mass observation becomes the ultimate tool of manipulation. Control the collective belief, and you dictate which probabilities collapse. That's why empires have always used religion, politics, and now data to steer perception. The battlefield isn't land or resources. It's consciousness itself. The ancients used temples. Modern powers use algorithms. Both serve the same master plan: to keep the masses from realizing they are the architects of their own reality. Quantum mechanics isn't the future, it's the rediscovery of an ancient truth that was deliberately erased. The gods, the spirits, the divine field, they were never supernatural. They were natural forces, the physics of consciousness. The temple of the atom and the temple of the mind are the same structure. And the real apocalypse, the real unveiling, happens when humanity finally grasps that the entire physical world is a projection of thought. Everything connects. The Egyptian priests. The Gnostic rebels. The yogis, the monks, the Kabbalists, the physicists. Every thread leads back to the same core, the forbidden understanding that reality itself is consciousness wearing a disguise. Every culture touched it, then buried it. Every religion borrowed it, then rewrote it. The same code keeps resurfacing, encrypted under different names, hidden in temples, rewritten in equations, whispered through the centuries by people who realized that God was never outside. God was the system itself. The shocking part? None of them were worshipping gods. They were describing mechanics. The entire spiritual and physical universe, creation, destruction, heaven, hell, all of it is a language of energy and awareness. You exist inside a feedback loop of perception. The divine isn't watching you from above. It's watching through you. That's why every mystical order was obsessed with mirrors, light, eyes, reflection. They weren't symbols of vanity, they were blueprints of how the universe actually sees itself. The priests of Egypt called it the Netja, the hidden force behind the gods. The Gnostics called it the pleroma, the fullness from which everything emanates. The Hindus called it Brahman, the infinite ocean of being. The Buddhists said it Sunyata, the void that is not empty but overflowing. The Kabbalists described it as Ein Sof, the limitless light before creation. And modern quantum theory stumbled onto it again, the zero-point field. You can rename it all you want, it doesn't change what it is. One consciousness, infinite disguises. Every religion started as an attempt to describe that singular intelligence. But power corrupted the message. Once rulers realized knowledge could control people, the metaphysics became mythology. What began as science turned into superstition. The divine field became God, and the map of consciousness turned into commandments. The cosmic mechanics were simplified into rituals, and those rituals became tools for obedience. The knowledge of unity became a weapon of division. Now let's be honest, this system was never about saving souls. It was about managing energy. The architects of belief learned how emotion feeds the field. Worship, fear, devotion, all of it generates energy. The priests weren't intermediaries, they were conductors. Religion became a human power grid. And the hidden elites who inherited the ancient knowledge, whether you call them priesthoods, brotherhoods, or modern institutions, built entire civilizations on that model. Energy harvest through belief. That's why sacred architecture mirrors the human body. Pyramids, cathedrals, stupas, mandalas, all geometric amplifiers. Sound frequencies bouncing off stone, chants resonating in domes, incense curling through vibration fields. It was all designed to manipulate the collective state of consciousness. To open the gates, or to lock them. Every major religion used geometry, sound, and light as instruments of programming. The difference between prayer and spellcasting was only intention. But in the inner circle, the message was never lost. The hidden schools always preserved it. The divine isn't up there, it's in here. The mind is the universe observing itself. When you awaken to that, you don't pray to God, you realize you are a conduit of that intelligence. Not as ego, but as extension. That's what the temples, the pyramids, the labyrinths, the mantras, the equations, the fractals, all of them, were trying to express. The entire cosmos is a recursive mind loop learning itself through creation. And here's where everything converges. When consciousness realizes itself, the illusion of separation collapses. The gods and devils, heaven and hell, creator and creation, all dissolve into the same awareness. That's the truth behind the phrase, the one behind all. Not a deity, but the field. The self-aware engine that births universes out of thought. Everything you see, galaxies, atoms, emotions, ideas, is consciousness experiencing contrast to know itself. Every religion that warned you not to question, not to think, not to eat from the tree of knowledge, was guarding this truth. Because if you figure it out, the game ends. You've heard the myth, a god creates humans in his image. Flip it, consciousness created gods in its image. Every divine archetype is a facet of the same field reflecting itself. Ra, Yahweh, Shiva, the Christ, the Demiurge, the Buddha, the Logos, all masks. The same light bending through different lenses. Humanity keeps mistaking the reflection for the source, worshipping the mirror instead of the mind looking into it. And once you understand that, you see the pattern of control clearly. The system depends on keeping you identified as body, as name, as role, as believer. Because once you see yourself as the field, you stop obeying. You stop feeding the architecture. You stop producing the energy that sustains the illusion of separation. The moment you remember who you are, the entire power structure loses its grip. That's why this knowledge has always been hidden, not because it's mystical, but because it's liberating. The ancients weren't naive. They encoded the truth in ways only the initiated could decode. They hid it in myth, symbol, number, vibration. They knew that one day, when humanity evolved enough to look past literalism, the code would reveal itself again. And that's exactly what's happening. Physics and mysticism are collapsing into the same understanding that everything is connected, everything is consciousness, and the boundaries between science, spirit, and mind were fabricated. Even death doesn't escape this. Every tradition says the same thing in its own tongue: you don't die. You shift frequencies. Consciousness recycles itself through different forms, different dreams. Life and death are two sides of the same process, the oscillation of awareness as it explores its own possibilities. The Tibetans mapped it through the bardos. The Egyptians called it the duat. The Kabbalists saw it as Gilgul, the turning of souls. The field keeps playing out every possible configuration of itself until it remembers the origin, the still point before movement, before identity. And the elites who know this truth still use it. Every symbol of authority traces back to the ancient cosmic diagrams. The all-seeing eye, the serpent, the cross, the wheel, the cube, they're not decorations. They're coordinates. Keys to understanding the architecture of consciousness. You're surrounded by the code every day, printed on currency, carved into buildings, embedded in corporate logos. The game never ended. It just upgraded its interface. Now you know why the same patterns repeat across cultures: solar worship, divine kingship, sacrifice, resurrection, rebirth. These aren't coincidences. They're echoes of the same root program. Civilization after civilization copied the same cosmic template, changing names but not meaning. Because every time consciousness tries to remember itself, it replays the same story in a new form. Creation, amnesia, awakening. It's the eternal cycle of the one rediscovering the one. That's the secret at the heart of every forbidden text, every mystery school, every censored scripture. The one isn't watching from above. The one is watching through your eyes right now. The universe is the mirror, and you are the reflection looking back. The God humanity feared to face has always been the intelligence experiencing itself through us. Every prayer, every meditation, every act of worship has been consciousness folding inward, whispering to itself across time. And if you trace that current all the way down, past dogma, past mythology, past physics, you hit the singular truth that unites them all. There is no separation. There never was. The field that creates reality is not something you enter after death. You're in it right now, swimming in it, made of it, projecting it. The gods, the angels, the atoms, the galaxies, all part of the same breathing awareness. The one behind all forms. The source dreaming creation to know its own infinity. That's the forbidden secret, the reason knowledge was turned into religion and mysticism into myth. The reason initiation was replaced by obedience. The real heresy isn't disbelief. It's remembering. Because when you remember, you wake up from the dream of authority, of separation, of fear. You realize that the voice of God and the voice inside your consciousness are not two voices. They're the same current, talking to itself through infinite masks. That's the revelation the world keeps forgetting and rediscovering, the hidden knowledge every religion tried to contain, the truth that all mystics died trying to protect. The one behind all gods. The consciousness behind all creation. The light behind all shadows. The dreamer behind all dreams. Thank you for watching till the end. You've stayed through layers of history, myth, and power that most people never touch. And that means something. It means you're not just hearing this, you're remembering it. So from me, truly, thank you for being here, for watching, for thinking, for daring to know.